We have been waiting for Season 2B of The Owl House for significantly longer than I think a lot of us anticipated. There was an entire year between the end of Season 1 of The Owl House and the start of Season 2A. And now, after the midpoint of Season 2A, there has been about another 6 months, with yesterday's lie airing in August, and it now being February. A lot of people thought that the show would be back by now, and I was one of them. Still, I think it is going to air quite soon. I am sympathetic to those who are saying that it might as well be called an entirely different season instead of the back half of Season 2 if there's going to be such a long time between Season 2A and 2B. But considering that the season is quickly approaching, we should probably contemplate what answers we hope that it gives to us. What questions we believe it provides a coherent response to. So let's dive into these questions that the show should probably answer in Season 2B. Not just plot questions, but more importantly, the real questions pertaining to the characters in the show and the relationships between those characters. That is the true core of the show. I'll start with the relatively least important questions and move up to the most important ones. What will happen to V and Camilla? Instead of focusing on Balos and his machinations in the last episode of Season 2A, the show does something surprising. It shifts focus. And we spend an entire episode on V, the basilisk who was posing as Luce in order to fit into Luce's household and pretend to give Camilla her daughter back. We called V Creepy Luce in the past and thought that she was an agent of Balos or Kikimora. We thought that she had some sinister plot, but she didn't. And that's an interesting choice. She's just an ordinary, misunderstood soul who doesn't really have a home. And she's looking for a place in the world. And Luce left her home. And if Luce hadn't said anything, and if V hadn't shown up, Camilla would have been heartbroken about losing Luce. But V was there to take Luce's place, and it was better for V, and it was better for Camilla, and it was better for Luce, even if there is that level of dishonesty. Now, why does the show decide to take this tangent? The practical functionality to the plot is that this episode causes Luce to reveal to her mom that she chose to stay in the Boiling Isles of her own free will and that she wants to go back there. Thus, causing Camilla to make Luce swear that Luce is going to come back and live on Earth after the end of Luce's adventures in the Boiling Isles. This is an understandable statement made by Camilla because Camilla feels that she has failed as a mother, that she was supposed to provide Luce a supportive and nurturing environment, and she didn't do that. And it's understandable that she feels that she's failed, considering how her daughter explicitly says that she prefers living in a dangerous fantasy world full of creatures that could kill her instead of living a relatively mundane and somewhat comfortable existence on Earth. Camilla takes this hard. It breaks her heart, and so she tries to get Luce to make that promise. Luce perhaps shouldn't have made it, but what choice did she have? Is she going to leave her mother for who knows how long without providing some sort of reassurance? There are no easy answers here, which I like. What happens is that Luce makes a promise to Camilla that she can't keep, and the weight of that promise and the impossibility of keeping it hangs over Luce. It's a shadow that's cast over whatever path she's going to take in the future. The poignant, somber tension between Luce and Camilla is one of the show's most searing thematic threads. But this could have been accomplished without V, so what is the purpose of spending so much time on V? I mean, I like V. She's adorable and awkward, and I like the complications she brings up in regards to Luce's decision to just leave her home behind and live on the Boiling Isles. From V's perspective, this is a little selfish. V has had no support for most of her life. She had to escape from being used as a lab rat, basically. Just an animal to experiment on. She had nothing until she found Camilla. And with Camilla, and with the whole process of adopting Luce's life there on Earth, V can make friends and get along with people and be more sociable and feel loved and comforted. Luce threw all that away just because she didn't feel like this world rewarded her creativity. Now, whether Luce was justified, you can kind of understand why this irks V to such an extent. But, as much as I like V, what is the show going to do with her? She currently exists as a loose end in the narrative. If the show spends more time on her, that is time that the show is taking away from the total amount of time that's there to be spent on characters who are more directly related to the narrative, such as Hunter and Willow and Gus and Lilith, if she ever comes back. I'll talk a little more about that later. And Amity's parents, who we have scarcely seen. It would take away even the time we spend on King and his quest to find his father and discover who he actually is, which is a major part of Season 2. Not expanding on V's character would feel like a missed opportunity, considering that the show dedicates this entire episode to V, but can the show justify, with so little time remaining, spending so much more time on V when there are all these different characters to develop and give resolutions to? It's a difficult question, and I don't really have a clear answer to it. Perhaps V will just have a brief appearance at the end of the show. But speaking of Gus and Willow and Lilith and all these other ostensibly important characters that we haven't seen a lot of, how much of them are we going to see going forward? Again, we must remember that we have only 11 more episodes in Season 2, plus 3 40-minute specials, and then that's it. That is not a lot of time, considering how much the show needs to reveal. It hasn't even gone into Belos yet. It hasn't even discussed in depth his grandiose plans. Now, I don't mean to suggest that The Owl House is a bad show for not spending X amount of time on these characters. Even at its worst, The Owl House is more mediocre than outright bad. But one of the show's most frustrating tendencies is its sprawl, its willingness to set up all these different characters and stories and plot lines, then not have enough time to spend on each of them. The show does not clearly discern between important characters that are central to the show and relatively unimportant characters. There are a lot of characters that just kind of hang in the median between those two groups. Now, let me show you what I mean with a counterexample. Think about Avatar: The Last Airbender. You have pretty clearly your main group of characters, Team Avatar plus Zuko, Azula, Mai and Ty Lee, Ozai, and the show constantly keeps going back to those characters. Meanwhile, no one is crying that the show doesn't spend enough time on Haru or the Swamp Benders, because it pretty clearly states, at least implicitly, that these are secondary characters. They're not that important. They might appear a couple times outside the episode that they were introduced in, but they're not central to the narrative. The Owl House kind of blurs these two categories of characters together in a way that is not perhaps particularly satisfying. Gus and Willow and Lilith are important characters in that the show has dedicated episodes toward fleshing out their conflicts and the tensions in their relationships and the differences between where they are and where they really want to be. But it's impossible to really think of them as central characters. They're important enough to the show that we want to spend more time with them, but they're kind of outside the orbit of the main focal points of the show, which are about Hunter and Amity and Luce and Ida. So what are we going to do with these liminal characters? I'm not really sure. I hope the series has some sort of reasonable solution to this little dilemma. And I suppose my last question is, will Hunter side with Luce? We know that the two of them have a special connection based on their interactions during the first episode when we see who Hunter is behind the mask. Luce is a bit antagonistic toward Hunter, and reasonably so, but they understand each other. They're both nerds, they're both passionate about wild magic and using their magical abilities outside this rigid structure that the Boiling Isles has set up for magic use. The difference between them is that Luce is supported by people who love her and care about her for her own sake and want the best for her, while the only figure in Hunter's life who supports him is Belos, who is cruel and manipulative and who might genuinely care about him, but still sees him as a tool for whatever ends Belos is trying to accomplish. I'm interested to see whether Hunter, with the help of Luce, and trust me, he will need the help of Luce, can detach himself from the machinations of Belos. If he doesn't, and if he doesn't do it soon, those machinations will probably threaten his physical well-being or even his life itself. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Owl House. I do sincerely hope it comes back soon, and I believe that this will happen. The Owl House has such a distressingly small number of episodes left to wrap up all the different plot threads and, more importantly, the different character dynamics and the tensions within the relationships between characters or within characters' relationships with themselves. There's a lot that's kind of left unresolved and a little muddled at this point, and I hope the show is able to pull it all to a satisfying and thoughtful resolution. I think it will. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.